Commander Zexathul stood at the observation deck of the massive battlecruiser Dominion's Fist, watching the blue-green world slowly rotate below them. His four arms crossed behind his back in the traditional pose of contemplation, while his reptilian features remained stoic. The planet looked peaceful enough, covered in vast oceans and green land masses. Nothing about it screamed danger to his experienced eyes. "Another primitive world to pacify," muttered General Korath, his second-in-command, as she approached. Her insectoid frame clicked softly with each step, mandibles twitching with anticipation. The intelligence report suggests these humans barely have space travel. Should be over in a few rotations. Zexthul nodded slowly. The galactic hegemony had been expanding for centuries, bringing order to chaotic systems across the galaxy. Their military might was unquestioned. They had conquered the crystal warriors of Zerion Prime, whose bodies could withstand plasma fire. They had defeated the gas-dwelling sentience of Nebula Reach, creatures who could phase through solid matter at will. Every world that dared resist their rule had fallen within days. "What do we know about their capabilities?" Zexthul asked, though he expected the usual report of primitive weapons and disorganized resistance. Korath activated her wrist display, holographic data streaming between them. Standard carbon-based life forms, average lifespan of roughly 80 solar cycles. They fight with chemical projectile weapons and crude explosive devices. No energy shields, no plasma weaponry, no advanced armor systems. Their fastest vehicles move at barely a fraction of light speed. Gravity? 0.98 galactic standard. Atmospheric pressure at 1.0. They call their world Earth in their dominant languages. Korath's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among her species. They actually evolved on a gravity well this strong. No wonder they're so slow and clumsy. Zexthul had seen this pattern hundreds of times. Most civilizations developed on low-gravity worlds or in zero-gravity environments. It made sense from an evolutionary standpoint. Less energy wasted fighting planetary pull meant more energy for developing intelligence and technology. These humans had somehow managed to evolve sentience while constantly fighting against a crushing gravitational field. It was almost admirable in its futility. "Estimated resistance duration?" he inquired. "Conservative estimates put it at 6 rotations maximum. Likely surrender within 3 once they witness our orbital bombardment capabilities." Korath gestured toward the view screen, showing dozens of hegemony vessels in formation. "Fleet Admiral Kexalon has assigned us 47 ships of the line. Enough firepower to level their major population centers within hours." But something nagged at Zexthul's mind. The Galactic Council's intelligence division wasn't known for underestimating threats. If this was truly such a simple conquest, why had they assigned such a large fleet? Why the extensive reconnaissance period? Usually, a dozen ships were more than sufficient for primitive worlds. "Have there been any unusual readings from the surface?" he asked. Korath's antenna twitched, a sign she was accessing deeper data files. "Some anomalous electromagnetic signatures from their urban centers, extensive underground tunnel systems in many regions, higher than expected industrial output for their technological level." She paused, looking puzzled. "Also, their population distribution is strange. Most species concentrate in optimal climatic zones, but humans seem to thrive everywhere. Desert regions, Arctic zones, high-altitude areas, even dense forest environments where other species would struggle." "Adaptive," Zexthul mused. "Perhaps more resilient than initially assessed." Before Korath could respond, an urgent communication chime echoed through the bridge. Communications Officer Teal'Nax, a tall, ethereal being from the gas giant Whisper Reach, materialized partially before them, his translucent form shimmering with urgency. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. It's unusual." "Put it through," Zexthul ordered. The main view screen flickered, then displayed a single human figure. Male by their species characteristics, wearing simple clothing. He appeared to be middle-aged by human standards, with graying hair and weathered features. Behind him was what looked like a simple room with primitive furnishings. "Greetings," the human said in surprisingly clear galactic standard. "My name is Marcus Chen. I represent the United Earth Defense Council. We know why you're here." Zexthul exchanged glances with Korath. Most primitive species took weeks to even understand first contact protocols, yet this human was speaking their language fluently. "You have studied our communications?" Zexthul replied. Marcus nodded calmly. "We've been monitoring galactic communications for decades. We know about the hegemony's expansion policies. We know what happened to the Altarian colonies, the Centauri Trade Federation, and the Republic of Free Worlds." This was concerning. Intelligence gathering of this sophistication suggested a far more advanced civilization than their initial reports indicated. "Then you understand the futility of resistance," Korath interjected, her mandibles clicking with authority. "Surrender now, and your species will be integrated peacefully into the hegemony. Resist and face annihilation." Marcus smiled, an expression that seemed oddly calm for someone facing the prospect of planetary conquest. "General, with respect, I think there's been a misunderstanding about what kind of world you've decided to attack." "Elaborate," Zexthul commanded. "Tell me, Commander, what's the highest gravity world your forces have successfully conquered?" The question caught Zexthul off guard. It was an unusual thing to focus on. "The Threnody homeworld, 1.4 Galactic Standard." "And how long did that campaign last?" 18 rotations, Zexthul admitted, remembering the brutal fighting in the heavy-gravity trenches. Many of his soldiers had suffered severe injuries simply from operating in that environment. "The Threnody were formidable opponents." "The Threnody evolved at 1.4 gravity," Marcus said quietly. "We evolved at 1.0 gravity, but that's not the important part." "What is?" Korath demanded. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "The important part is that 1.0 gravity isn't the strongest environment we live in. We don't just survive on our homeworld, Commander. We thrive in environments that would kill most galactic species within minutes. Our soldiers train in conditions that your people would consider lethal." "Impossible," Korath scoffed. "No species could—" "Let me show you something," Marcus interrupted gently. The camera angle shifted, revealing a massive view screen behind him displaying images from Earth's surface. This is the Sahara Desert. Daytime temperatures reach 50 Celsius. No water for thousands of kilometers. We have cities there. This is Antarctica. Minus 40 Celsius, constant wind, complete darkness for months at a time. We have research stations there, permanently manned. The images continued cycling. Deep ocean installations at crushing pressures. Mountain cities at altitudes where oxygen was scarce. Industrial complexes in volcanic regions where the ground itself was hostile to life. This is the Amazon rainforest. Everything there is designed to kill you. Poisonous plants, venomous animals, diseases that can drop a healthy adult in hours. We have millions of people living there. This is the Himalayan range, 8,000 meters above sea level, where the air is too thin to breathe. We climb those mountains for recreation. Zexthul felt a chill run down his spine. He had served in hostile environments, but nothing like what he was seeing. The humans weren't just surviving in these places. They were building, thriving, making homes in what looked like active battlegrounds against nature itself. "Your homeworld," Marcus continued, "based on our observations of your fleet, has a gravity of 0.6 standard, an average temperature of 18 Celsius, and a stable, breathable atmosphere with minimal weather variations. Am I correct?" Zexthul nodded slowly, though he was beginning to understand that this wasn't a sign of primitive conditions, but something far more troubling. "Commander, You're about to invade a world where the children grow up in conditions that would hospitalize your elite soldiers, where our weakest civilians routinely endure physical stresses that would cripple your warriors. Marcus's smile never wavered, but his eyes had become very cold. Earth isn't just our homeworld. It's our training ground. The bridge fell silent. Zexthul's tactical mind was rapidly recalculating everything he thought he knew about this operation. If humans had evolved and thrived in such hostile conditions, what did that mean for their physical capabilities, their endurance, their pain tolerance? Perhaps, Korath said slowly, their environment has made them stronger than expected, but strength means nothing against superior technology and numbers. We have plasma weaponry, energy shields, powered armor. Yes, Marcus agreed, and those are significant advantages. But tell me, General, have you ever fought an enemy that you couldn't see coming? Before Korath could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the bridge. Tactical displays lit up with incoming data that made no sense. "Report!" Zexthul barked. Tactical Officer Nexivar, a cybernetic-enhanced being whose neural implants interfaced directly with the ship's sensors, looked up with confusion written across his augmented features. "Commander, we're detecting massive structural collapses across multiple continents on the planet's surface. Major cities are disappearing." "Orbital bombardment from another fleet?" Korath demanded. "Negative. No energy signatures, no missile trails, no external attack vectors detected. The structures are just collapsing into themselves." Zexthul turned back to the view screen, where Marcus was still sitting calmly in his simple room. "What are you doing to your own cities?" "We're not destroying them, Commander. We're hiding them." Marcus gestured, and the camera pulled back to reveal what Zexthul had assumed was a simple room was actually an elaborate simulation. Behind the false walls, he could see the gleam of advanced technology and the movement of personnel. "What you're seeing is us going underground. Every major population center on Earth has been built with extensive subterranean infrastructure. We can disappear our entire civilization in a matter of hours." "Underground warrens," Nexvar reported, his voice tight with concern. "The tunnel systems we detected earlier, they're not primitive mining operations. They're military installations. Hundreds of levels deep, reinforced against orbital bombardment, connected by transport systems we can barely detect." Marcus nodded approvingly. "We've been preparing for this day for decades. The moment we detected galactic civilization, we knew eventually someone would come calling. We studied every conquest, every defeat, every tactical mistake made by the species that came before us." "You cannot hide forever," Zexthul said, though he was beginning to feel the first stirrings of real concern. "We have ground-penetrating sensors, seismic charges, atmospheric processors that can make your world uninhabitable." "Yes, you do," Marcus agreed. "And if you use them, you'll destroy the very world you came to conquer. The hegemony doesn't want a dead planet, Commander. You want resources, infrastructure, a population to integrate into your empire. If you're willing to glass the entire world just to prove a point, then you've already lost everything you came here to gain." The tactical implications were staggering. If the humans could hide their entire civilization underground, if they could disappear from orbital sensors at will, then every advantage the hegemony possessed was suddenly questionable. Ground operations would be necessary, and ground operations in the gravity well of a world whose inhabitants were naturally adapted to conditions that would cripple most galactic species. "There's more," Marcus said quietly. "We've been studying your tactics, your weapons, your armor systems. We know how your soldiers move, how they think, how they fight. We've run thousands of simulations based on your previous conquests." He gestured again, and the view screen split to show what appeared to be training footage. Humans in simple clothing and basic equipment moving through environments that looked like alien ship interiors, practicing with primitive chemical weapons against targets wearing hegemony-style armor and using hegemony-style tactics. We can't match your technology, Marcus admitted, but we don't have to. We just have to fight you in places where technology matters less than endurance, adaptation, and the willingness to do whatever it takes to survive. Zexthul watched the training footage with growing unease. The humans moved differently than other species he had fought. They were patient, methodical, willing to endure discomfort and injury that would cause other beings to retreat. They used terrain and environment as weapons in ways he had never seen before. "This is all very impressive," Korath said, though her mandibles had stopped clicking, and her posture suggested she was not as confident as her words implied. "But you are still a single world against an empire that spans thousands of systems. Even if you make the conquest more difficult than expected, you cannot win." Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. "That's probably true, General. In a direct confrontation, humanity would eventually lose. But tell me, how many of your previous conquests required a 47-ship task force to complete?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Zexthul realized that Marcus was right. They had brought an unusually large force for what should have been a simple primitive world pacification mission. "The Council's intelligence division recommended the larger force," Zexthul said carefully. "Because they know something you haven't been told," Marcus replied. "Earth isn't just another death world, Commander. It's the death world, the most hostile environment in known space that still supports complex life. And we didn't just survive here. We conquered it so completely that we had to leave the planet just to find new challenges." The implications of that statement sent a chill through the bridge. If humans had mastered their own hostile world so thoroughly that they were seeking greater challenges in space, what did that suggest about their capabilities? "I think this conversation has gone on long enough," Korath said, her voice strained. "Regardless of your planet's environmental challenges, you cannot—" She was interrupted by another alarm. This time, it was Nexavar who looked up with genuine alarm in his enhanced features. "Commander, we have a problem. Our perimeter scouts are reporting contact with unidentified vessels, small craft, minimal energy signatures approaching from multiple vectors." "How many?" Zexthul demanded. "Unknown. They're using some kind of stealth technology we can't penetrate. Our sensors are detecting movement, but we can't get accurate counts or identify their capabilities." Marcus smiled again, and this time there was something predatory in the expression. "Let me ask you one more question, Commander. In all your previous conquests, how many enemy forces have you faced that were already in space, waiting for you, before you even arrived?" The question hit like a physical blow. Every other species the hegemony had conquered had been essentially planet-bound, with limited or no spacefaring capabilities. The few that had space travel used it for exploration or trade, not military purposes. But humans— "Impossible," Zexthul said. "Our long-range sensors detected no significant space-based civilization in this system. That's because you were looking for large ships, energy signatures, conventional propulsion systems," Marcus explained patiently. "We've been living and working in space for generations, Commander, not in massive ships that announce their presence across light years, but in small, efficient vessels designed to be invisible until the moment we choose to reveal ourselves." As if summoned by his words, the tactical display suddenly exploded with new contacts, dozens, then hundreds of small vessels, appearing as if from nowhere throughout the system. They had been hiding in asteroid fields, powered down in the shadow of moons, drifting silent and cold in the vast spaces between planets. "Our advance fleet," Marcus said with obvious pride. "They've been watching you since you entered the system, learning your formations, your communication protocols, your tactical preferences. Every ship in your fleet has been under observation for weeks." Zexthul felt something he had not experienced in decades of military service. The cold touch of real fear. Not fear of death or defeat in battle. Those were familiar companions to any soldier. This was the fear of facing an utterly unknown enemy, one whose capabilities and intentions were completely outside his experience. "What do you want?" he asked finally. Marcus leaned back in his chair, and for the first time, his expression softened slightly. "We want what every species wants, Commander, the right to exist, to grow, to find our place in the galaxy. But we've learned from the fate of every world that came before us that the hegemony doesn't offer that choice. You conquer, integrate, or destroy. There is no negotiation." "There could be," Zexthul said quickly, though he knew it was probably a lie. The hegemony's expansion policies were inflexible. "Perhaps arrangements could be made." "No," Marcus said firmly. "We've studied your empire, remember? We know how this ends. The only variable is how much it costs you." The bridge fell silent again as the implications settled over everyone present. This was not going to be a simple conquest. This was going to be a war unlike anything the hegemony had ever fought before, and they were starting it at a severe disadvantage. The first shot came from nowhere. Fleet Admiral Kexalon was reviewing tactical displays in the command center of the dreadnought Hegemony's Will when his flagship's shield suddenly flared under impact. The massive vessel, designed to withstand concentrated fire from entire enemy fleets, shuddered under a single projectile strike that somehow penetrated 3 layers of defensive barriers. "Report!" Kexalon's crystalline voice rang out across the bridge, his transparent form flickering with agitation. As a being of living mineral from the core worlds, he had experienced thousands of battles, but nothing had ever struck his shields with such precision. "Unknown projectile, sir," reported sensor specialist Kexmar, her tentacles dancing over control surfaces with increasing urgency. "Impact vector suggests origin point approximately 40,000 kilometers off the port bow, but our sensors detect no enemy vessels in that region." "Impossible. At that range, even a stealth ship would show some signature when firing." Before Kexmar could respond, another impact shook the ship. This time, the projectile somehow found a microscopic gap between shield generators and struck the hull directly. Damage reports flooded in, minimal structural damage, but the precision was terrifying. Something was shooting at them with impossible accuracy from impossible distances using weapons that shouldn't have been able to penetrate their defenses. "All ships, defensive formation Theta 7, Kexlon commanded. "Begin active scanning for—" A third shot struck the communication array of the battlecruiser, Sovereign's Fist, precisely severing the main transmission dish while leaving the rest of the ship untouched. The weapon wasn't trying to destroy ships. It was systematically disabling specific systems with surgical precision. "Admiral," came a transmission from the surface. It was the same human, Marcus Chen, appearing on the main view screen with that same calm expression. "I think it's time we continued our conversation." "What kind of weapons are you using?" Kexalon demanded. "Our sensors cannot detect your firing positions." Marcus smiled. "We're not using energy weapons, Admiral. We're using kinetic projectiles fired from positions you can't detect because you're looking for the wrong things. May I introduce you to Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, one of our finest marksmen." The view screen split, showing a second human. Female. Wearing what appeared to be simple camouflaged clothing, lying prone in what looked like empty space. It took Kexalon several moments to realize she was positioned on a small asteroid, perfectly camouflaged against the rocky surface, with equipment so minimal it barely registered on sensors. "Ma'am," the sniper said with crisp professionalism. "Target acquisition and engagement confirmed. I have clear lines of sight on 14 primary vessels. Awaiting further orders." "Impressive accuracy, Sergeant Mitchell," Marcus replied. "What's your current range to target?" "Approximately 42,000 kilometers to the primary target, sir. Wind is negligible in vacuum conditions. Gravity well calculations are holding steady." Kexalon's tactical mind reeled. 42,000 kilometers was beyond the effective range of most ship-to-ship weapon systems, yet this human was making precision shots with what appeared to be primitive projectile weapons. And she was referring to gravity well calculations as if firing across interplanetary distances was routine. "How is this possible?" he asked. Marcus gestured toward technical readouts appearing on his side of the screen. "Sergeant Mitchell is using a railgun system developed specifically for zero-gravity long-range engagements. The projectiles are guided by micro-corrections calculated in real time based on gravitational influences, target movement, and defensive systems analysis. But the computational requirements alone are well within human capabilities," Marcus interrupted gently. "Admiral, you've been thinking of us as primitives with crude weapons. But we've been living and fighting in space for generations. Every environmental challenge you can imagine, we've not only faced but mastered." "One sniper cannot threaten an entire fleet," Kexalon said, though he was beginning to understand that this demonstration was about more than just marksmanship. "You're absolutely right," Marcus agreed. "Sergeant Mitchell, how many shooters do we have in position for this operation?" "Current count is 843 confirmed positions, sir. All targets are painted and ranged. We have overlapping fields of fire on every vessel in the enemy formation." The number hit the bridge like a physical blow. 843 snipers. Positioned throughout the asteroid field and on disabled equipment, the hegemony forces had dismissed as space debris, all with clear shots at vital ship systems. "Admiral," Marcus continued, "let me explain how this engagement is going to proceed. Your ships are powerful, well-armored, and equipped with devastating weapons. In a direct confrontation, you would win easily, but that's not the fight we're offering you." As if to emphasize the point, another series of impacts struck across the fleet. Communication arrays, sensor nodes, shield generators, and weapon systems began failing in precise sequence. The shots weren't random. They were following a carefully planned pattern designed to systematically degrade the fleet's capabilities without actually destroying the ships. "You're disabling us," Kexalon realized. "We're giving you a choice," Marcus corrected. "You can withdraw now, with your ships damaged but recoverable and your crews alive. Or you can continue this engagement and we'll show you what happens when humans fight an enemy that refuses to engage on their terms. Our ground forces are already compromised," Marcus said matter-of-factly. "Shall we discuss that?" The view screen shifted to show the hegemony's main staging area on one of Earth's moons, where thousands of elite soldiers were preparing for the ground assault. The base looked secure, surrounded by defensive barriers and protected by overlapping shield systems. But something was wrong with the picture. "Colonel Rexthor," Marcus called out. "Can you hear me?" To Kexalon's amazement, a response came immediately from the surface base. "Who is this? How are you accessing our communication systems?" "My name is Marcus Chen. I represent Earth's Defense Council. Colonel, I need to ask you a question. When was the last time you conducted a perimeter check?" There was a long pause. 20 minutes ago. All sectors clear." "Colonel, I suggest you look again, and this time, look more carefully." Through the base's external cameras, they watched as Colonel Rexthor's security teams began another perimeter sweep. At first, everything appeared normal. The barren lunar landscape stretched away in all directions, empty except for scattered rocks and the occasional crater. Then one of the rocks moved. What had appeared to be a simple boulder suddenly revealed itself to be a human soldier in sophisticated camouflage, so perfectly adapted to the environment that even close-range sensors had failed to detect the deception. As the security team watched in shock, more rocks began moving. Dozens, then hundreds of perfectly concealed human soldiers emerged from hiding places that had been invisible moments before. "Impossible," Rexthor's voice was strained. "Our sensors would have detected—" Your sensors detect energy signatures, metal compositions, and standard camouflage materials, came a new voice. This time it was a woman, speaking with calm authority. I'm Captain Rodriguez, 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion. We've been in position around your base for 6 days, Colonel. We've been monitoring your security rotations, learning your patrol patterns, and mapping your defensive systems. The external cameras showed the truth of her words. The hegemony base was completely surrounded by human forces that had somehow managed to position themselves undetected within striking distance of every critical system. Your advanced teams never detected us because we don't fight like other species, Captain Rodriguez continued. We don't use energy weapons that create sensor signatures. We don't wear powered armor that generates heat or electromagnetic emissions. We use the environment itself as both weapon and camouflage. To demonstrate, several of the humans opened fire with weapons that appeared to be simple chemical projectiles. But the ammunition was anything but simple. The rounds struck shield generators with pinpoint accuracy, but instead of exploding, they released clouds of metallic particles that created cascading feedback loops in the energy systems. Nanomachine-enhanced kinetic rounds, Marcus explained to the increasingly horrified Admiral. The projectiles carry microscopic payloads designed to interfere with specific technologies. Your shields aren't being overpowered. They're being systematically corrupted from within. Within minutes, the moon base's defensive systems began failing in sequence. Shield generators went offline as nanomachines disrupted their power systems. Sensor arrays became blind as microscopic infiltrators interfered with their detection capabilities. Communication systems started broadcasting random noise as their control circuits were compromised. Colonel Rexthor, Captain Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos. Your base is no longer defensible. I'm offering you the opportunity to surrender with your forces intact. We have 40,000 elite soldiers, Rexthor protested. You cannot have enough forces to... Colonel, we don't need more forces. We just need better ones. The captain's voice remained infuriatingly calm. Your soldiers are excellent fighters, but they're trained for conventional warfare against opponents using conventional tactics. We don't fight conventionally. To prove her point, she provided a tactical demonstration. Several human soldiers began moving across the lunar surface toward the base perimeter. They didn't charge or attempt to overwhelm the defenses. Instead, they moved like ghosts, using the low-gravity environment to cover impossible distances with single bounds, taking cover behind features that shouldn't have provided adequate protection, appearing and disappearing so quickly that the hegemony's targeting systems couldn't lock onto them. Your weapons are designed for use in standard gravity environments, Rodriguez explained, as her soldiers systematically infiltrated the outer defensive rings. Your armor is optimized for atmospheric conditions with breathable air and predictable temperature ranges. Your tactics assume enemies that fight in formations, with clear command structures, using detectable equipment. We fight differently. We've trained in vacuum conditions since childhood. We're comfortable in environments that would incapacitate most species within minutes, and we've learned to use your advantages against you. One of the human soldiers demonstrated by leaping impossible distances in the low gravity, using momentum and trajectory calculations that would have been suicide for most other species. Instead of trying to breach the base's barriers directly, the humans were simply going around, over, and under them, exploiting movement capabilities that the base's designers had never considered. Admiral, Marcus's voice drew Kexalon's attention back to the fleet engagement. Are you beginning to understand what kind of war you've started? The Admiral looked at his tactical displays, showing his fleet systematically being disabled by invisible enemies, his ground forces surrounded by opponents they hadn't detected until it was too late, and his most elite soldiers being outmaneuvered by opponents using tactics that defied conventional military doctrine. What are your terms? He asked quietly. Withdrawal, Marcus said simply. Take your forces and leave this system. Report to the Hegemony Council that Earth is defended and any future attacks will be met with overwhelming response. The Council will not accept defeat from a single world. Then they'll learn what we've learned about fighting impossible odds, Marcus replied. Admiral, humanity has been at war with our own environment for our entire existence. We've fought ice ages, volcanic eruptions, plague, famine, and disasters that would have wiped out most species. We've survived by becoming the most adaptable, persistent, and ruthlessly innovative species in known space. You cannot defeat the entire hegemony. We don't have to, Marcus said with that same calm confidence. We just have to make conquest more expensive than the hegemony is willing to pay. And Admiral, I assure you, we can make it very, very expensive. As if summoned by his words, new tactical data flooded the fleet's sensors. The 800 snipers positioned throughout the system weren't the only human forces present. Stealth ships were powering up throughout the system, revealing themselves to be hidden among what the hegemony had assumed were asteroids, disabled satellites, and space debris. 47 ships, Marcus said, noting the Admiral's expression. That's what the Council sent to conquer one primitive world. But you're not facing one world, Admiral. You're facing a species that has turned the most hostile environment in known space into our home, our training ground, and our fortress. The true scope of human preparations was becoming clear. Every asteroid, every piece of space debris, every seemingly empty region of the system concealed human forces. The hegemony hadn't just been outmaneuvered tactically, they had been completely surrounded strategically from the moment they entered the system. Sergeant Mitchell, Marcus called out. Tactical assessment. Sir, enemy fleet is effectively neutralized. Primary weapons systems offline, communications severely degraded, navigation compromised. They can still withdraw, but they cannot conduct offensive operations. Colonel Rex Thor's situation. Base perimeter breached in 47 locations. Defensive systems offline. Enemy forces are contained but not yet captured. Awaiting orders. Marcus turned back to Admiral Kexalon. Your move, Admiral. The crystalline being looked at his displays one final time. His fleet was disabled, his ground forces surrounded, and his entire tactical doctrine had been rendered obsolete by opponents who fought like nothing he had ever encountered before. But more than that, he was beginning to understand something that chilled him to his mineral core. The humans weren't just defending their homeworld, they were teaching the hegemony a lesson. Everything they had done could have been lethal instead of simply disabling. Every shot that had taken out a shield generator could have penetrated the hull. Every tactical position that had revealed itself could have been used for devastating attacks instead of demonstrations. The humans weren't just winning. They were winning while holding back, showing mercy to opponents who had come to conquer or destroy them. General Korath, he called out. Signal fleet withdrawal. Sir, we're leaving. Now. As the hegemony fleet began its limping retreat from the system, Admiral Kexalon wondered what kind of report he was going to give to the Council. How do you explain that a single world had outfought, outmaneuvered, and overwhelmed a force designed to conquer star systems? How do you explain that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology or numbers, but the simple fact that they had learned to thrive in conditions that would kill anyone else? And most terrifyingly, how do you explain that they had shown restraint when they could have chosen annihilation? The war for Earth was over before it had truly begun, but Admiral Kexalon had the sinking feeling that the war with humanity was just getting started. The Galactic Council chambers had never seen such chaos. Representatives from 300 member species filled the vast amphitheater, their various forms creating a symphony of clicks, buzzes, and harmonic tones that reflected their agitation. At the center of it all, Admiral Kexalon stood at the testimony podium, his crystalline form dim with exhaustion and stress. Impossible, declared Counselor Vexandra, her serpentine form coiled in the traditional posture of disbelief. A single primitive world cannot have defeated a 47-ship task force without suffering significant casualties. With respect, Counselor, Kexalon replied, his voice carrying the weight of recent defeat. I suggest you review the tactical recordings. The humans didn't just defeat us. They chose not to destroy us completely when they could have done so with minimal effort. Supreme Chancellor Morthak, the ancient cybernetic being who had led the Council for over 2 centuries, gestured with mechanical precision toward the holographic displays surrounding the amphitheater. Show us. The chamber darkened as 3-dimensional tactical recreations filled the space around them. Representatives watched in stunned silence as the recordings played out. Invisible human forces surrounding the hegemony fleet, precision shots from impossible distances, ground forces that appeared from seemingly empty terrain, and systematic disable of advanced military systems using weapons that barely registered on sensors. These humans fought an entirely defensive engagement, noted Counselor Zektari, his insectoid features twitching with analysis. No attempts at ship capture, minimal casualties inflicted, surgical precision in system destruction. This suggests sophisticated military doctrine focused on deterrence rather than conquest. More troubling than their tactics, Admiral Kexalon continued, is their strategic preparation. Every aspect of their defense had been planned decades in advance. They knew we were coming before we even selected Earth as a target. Explain, Chancellor Morthak commanded. They had been monitoring galactic communications for generations, studying every conquest, every tactical engagement, every strategic decision made by the hegemony. They knew our ship configurations, our weapon systems, our defensive capabilities, and our standard operational procedures before we knew they existed. The implications sent ripples of unease through the assembled representatives. The hegemony's expansion had been based on technological superiority and strategic surprise. If other species could study and counter their methods, what are their technological capabilities? Asked Counselor Lixatara, her gelatinous form shifting with concern. That's the disturbing part, Kexalon admitted. Their technology is simultaneously primitive and advanced in ways we don't fully understand. They use kinetic weapons instead of energy systems, but with precision and effectiveness that surpasses our plasma artillery. They employ stealth based on environmental adaptation rather than energy cloaking, but achieve invisibility levels our sensors cannot penetrate. Their soldiers operate effectively in conditions that would incapacitate most galactic species, he continued. Vacuum environments, extreme temperatures, gravitational variations, radiation levels that require protective equipment for our forces. They function in these conditions with minimal life support. Counselor Drixnall, representing the gas giant civilizations, emitted a series of harmonic tones that translated as deep concern. Are you suggesting they have adapted to survive in space itself? More than that, Kexalon replied. They've adapted to survive anywhere. Their homeworld provided such hostile training conditions that the vacuum of space represents only a moderate environmental challenge. They've essentially been preparing for galactic warfare their entire evolutionary history. Chancellor Morthak processed this information through his cybernetic neural networks, cross-referencing it against thousands of previous conquest records. Admiral, in your professional assessment, what would be required to successfully conquer this world? The question hung in the chamber like a death sentence. Kexalon had been hoping to avoid this analysis, but his duty demanded honesty. Conservative estimates suggest a minimum of 500 ships of the line with specialized equipment for extended siege operations, he began. Ground forces would need environmental suits rated for extreme conditions, weapons designed specifically for the gravitational and atmospheric challenges, and tactical doctrines completely rewritten for opponents who can use any environment as a battlefield. Even then, he added quietly, success would not be guaranteed. The humans demonstrated capabilities we're only beginning to understand. Their strategic planning, their adaptability, their willingness to endure conditions that would break most species. These suggest a military culture unlike anything in galactic history. The cost would be enormous, Counselor Vexandra observed. 500 ships represents nearly a quarter of our entire fleet. And that assumes they don't have additional capabilities they chose not to reveal. Kexalon warned. They showed us exactly what they wanted us to see. Nothing more. Chancellor Morthak's cybernetic components whirred as he processed the strategic implications. The hegemony's expansion had been successful because they only engaged in conflicts they could win quickly and decisively. Extended campaigns were economically and politically unsustainable. There's another consideration, Kexalon continued reluctantly. The humans made it clear that Earth is not their only inhabited location. They've been living in space for generations, with settlements throughout their system and beyond. Conquering their homeworld would not eliminate the threat they represent. Are you suggesting they pose a threat to the hegemony itself? Counselor Zektari asked. I'm suggesting they pose a threat to our expansion model, Kexalon corrected. They've proven that a sufficiently prepared and adaptable species can successfully resist our standard conquest protocols. If that information spreads to other systems, the unspoken implication was terrifying. The hegemony's power rested on the assumption that resistance was futile. If other species learned that humans had successfully defended themselves, it could inspire rebellions across hundreds of worlds. What do the humans want? Chancellor Morthak asked. They claim to want the same thing every species wants, the right to exist and grow without interference. But their representative, Marcus Chen, made it clear they understand our expansion policies leave no room for negotiation. Did they make any demands? Only that we leave their system and not return. They seemed more interested in demonstrating capability than in conquest or negotiation. Counselor Lixtera's gelatinous form shifted thoughtfully. A purely defensive posture suggests they may not seek expansion beyond their current territory. Perhaps accommodation is possible. Or, Counselor Drixnall harmonized ominously, they're simply preparing for a larger conflict. A species capable of such strategic planning may view this engagement as merely the opening move in a longer campaign. The debate continued for hours, but Admiral Kexalon found his attention drifting to a disturbing realization. Throughout the entire engagement with humanity, he had felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of military service: respect for an opponent. The humans had fought with honor, showing mercy when they could have chosen destruction, demonstrating capability without unnecessary cruelty. It made the prospect of future conflict even more troubling. Admiral, Chancellor Morthak's voice drew him back to the present. What is your recommendation? Kexalon had been dreading this question. His military training demanded he recommend whatever strategy would ensure hegemony victory. His experience suggested that victory against humanity would come at a cost the hegemony could not afford. His conscience, a faculty he hadn't consulted in years of service, suggested there might be value in considering alternatives to conquest. I recommend we classify the Earth system as a restricted zone, he said finally. Prohibit military engagement pending further analysis. The humans have demonstrated capabilities that require us to fundamentally reconsider our approach to species of their type. Are you suggesting we abandon expansion in that sector? Counselor Vexandra demanded. I'm suggesting we find out what we're really dealing with before we commit resources to a conflict we don't fully understand. The chamber erupted in debate. Representatives argued about precedent, about the implications for other systems, about the political consequences of appearing weak. But underlying all the discussion was a growing recognition that humanity represented something new in galactic politics. After hours of deliberation, Chancellor Morthak called for order. The Council will consider Admiral Kexalon's recommendations. In the meantime, all military operations in the Earth system are suspended pending further review. As the representatives dispersed, Admiral Kexalon remained at the testimony podium, staring at the tactical recordings still playing in the holographic displays. He found himself wondering what kind of civilization could produce soldiers like Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, who could make precision shots across impossible distances while remaining invisible to advanced sensors. What kind of culture created strategists like Marcus Chen, who could plan defensive operations spanning decades? What kind of species thrived in conditions that would kill most galactic life? 3 days later, his questions received partial answers when an unexpected transmission reached the council chambers. It was Marcus Chen again, appearing on the main communication screen with that same calm demeanor that had proven so unsettling during their previous encounters. "Chancellor Morthak," Marcus said with respectful formality, "I understand the council has been debating our recent engagement. I thought it might be helpful to provide some additional context." "You have been monitoring our communications?" the Chancellor asked, though he didn't sound surprised. "We monitor all galactic communications, Chancellor. It's how we've stayed informed about your expansion activities. But I'm not contacting you to discuss surveillance. I'm contacting you to discuss the future." "Elaborate." The hegemony's expansion model assumes that conquest is the only path to galactic influence, but there are alternatives. Trade, cooperation, mutual defense agreements, these create stability without requiring subjugation. The Council has found that voluntary cooperation is unreliable, Chancellor Morthak replied diplomatically. "That's because most species haven't had the luxury of choosing their level of cooperation," Marcus observed. "When the choice is between conquest and annihilation, cooperation isn't really voluntary. But when the choice is between cooperation and costly conflict, the calculations change. What are you proposing?" "We're proposing to change the calculations for everyone. Humanity is prepared to share certain defensive technologies and tactical innovations with any species that requests assistance. We're also prepared to provide training and support for worlds that wish to improve their defensive capabilities." The implications were staggering. If humanity began sharing their defensive innovations with other species, the hegemony's technological advantages would rapidly erode. More importantly, if they began training other species in their unconventional tactics, the military doctrines that had made expansion possible would become obsolete. "This would be considered an act of war," Chancellor Morthak warned. "Only if you choose to interpret it that way," Marcus replied. "We're not planning to attack anyone. We're simply offering to help species defend themselves. What you do with that information is your choice. You're forcing our hand. We're giving you options, Chancellor. You can continue the current expansion model, knowing that it will now face effective resistance. You can attempt to conquer Earth, knowing that it will cost far more than you've ever paid for a single world. Or you can consider that there might be more profitable ways to engage with the galaxy, such as trade, technology exchange, cooperative exploration, mutual defense against genuine threats rather than manufactured conflicts." Marcus paused thoughtfully. "Chancellor, humanity has been studying galactic civilization for decades. We know the hegemony's expansion isn't driven by resource scarcity or territorial necessity. It's driven by political momentum and military tradition. But those drivers become irrelevant when expansion becomes more costly than beneficial, and we're prepared to make it very costly indeed." Chancellor Morthak's cybernetic components processed the strategic implications. Marcus was correct. If humanity could make conquest prohibitively expensive for multiple worlds, the hegemony's entire expansion model would collapse. "What assurances can you provide that this defensive technology wouldn't be used offensively?" "The same assurances you provide that your military technology won't be used to conquer peaceful worlds," Marcus replied with a slight smile, "which is to say, none. But consider this. Species that can successfully defend themselves have no incentive to launch aggressive campaigns. It's only the defenseless who feel compelled to attack before being attacked. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. In a single conversation, Marcus Chen had fundamentally altered the strategic balance of galactic politics. The hegemony could no longer assume that technological superiority guaranteed military victory. More importantly, they could no longer assume that resistance would be isolated to individual worlds. Admiral Kexalon realized that the engagement at Earth had been more than a military defeat. It had been the opening move in a completely different kind of conflict, one where the weapons were ideas rather than ships, where victory was measured in changed calculations rather than conquered territory. For the first time in hegemony history, expansion had become optional rather than inevitable. And somehow, that felt like the most significant military victory in galactic history, even though no shots had been fired and no territory had changed hands. The humans had won by offering their enemies a choice. And choice, Admiral Kexalon realized, was the one weapon against which the hegemony had no defense.